The research vessel holds its position 40 kilometers off the continental slope, engines idling against a swell that moves the deck in long, patient rolls. It is just past 3 in the morning, and in the control container bolted to the aft deck, the only real light comes from the monitors. On the largest of them, a number ticks upward with a slowness that borders on cruelty. Depth, measured in meters, climbing past 2,900 as a remotely operated vehicle descends on a fiber optic tether thinner than a garden hose. There is no drama in the descent itself. It is mostly waiting. The vehicle falls at roughly 30 meters a minute, and for the better part of 2 hours the crew watches a column of black water scroll past the cameras, interrupted only by the occasional drift of marine snow, the slow rain of organic debris that falls continuously from the sunlit world far above. 2 miles of water is not a phrase that means much until you have watched a machine take an hour and a half simply to reach the place where the interesting part begins. What waits at the bottom, in this particular case, is not a certainty. It is a hypothesis built from a smear of acoustic data collected weeks earlier, when a hull-mounted multi-beam sonar passed over this stretch of seabed and returned something that did not match the surrounding terrain. The seafloor here is abyssal plain, a landscape of astonishing flatness, sediment laid down grain by grain over millions of years until it forms a surface smoother than most deserts. Against that flatness, the sonar had caught a cluster of hard returns, angular, elevated a few meters above the sediment, arranged with a regularity that natural processes rarely produce. Rocks do not usually sit in straight lines. The team had circled the anomaly with the deliberate caution that defines this kind of work, refining the map, ruling out the mundane explanations one by one, until the only responsible next step was to send eyes down and look. That is the entire premise of the expedition. Not the promise of a find, but the discipline of verification. To understand why a hard return on a sonar screen justifies the enormous expense of a deep-water dive, it helps to understand how little of the ocean floor we have actually seen. The figure repeated in oceanographic circles is that we have mapped, in genuine high resolution, only a small fraction of the seabed, while the rest is known only through satellite-derived estimates that infer the shape of the bottom from tiny variations in the height of the sea surface above it. Those satellite maps are extraordinary achievements, but their resolution is coarse, capable of resolving features that are kilometers across while missing anything smaller. A shipwreck, an aircraft, a geological structure the size of a building. All of these vanish entirely into the blur. When people say the deep ocean is unexplored, this is what they mean in practical terms. We possess a low-resolution sketch of a world larger than every continent combined, and almost everything within it that is smaller than a mountain remains undiscovered simply because no instrument has ever passed close enough to detect it. So the vehicle descends, and the number climbs, and eventually the pilots begin to slow it, easing off the descent rate as the altimeter registers the approaching bottom. This is the moment of highest concentration in the container. The seabed at these depths is a place of extreme fragility, and it is also a place where the vehicle, worth several $1 million and connected to the surface by that single vulnerable tether, can be destroyed in seconds by a collision, an entanglement, or a sudden downdraft of current. The pilots bring it to a hover 10 meters above the sediment and let it stabilize. On the monitors, the lights of the vehicle finally illuminate the floor, and the water clears from the pale brown fog of disturbed particles into something almost startling in its stillness. The abyssal plain, seen directly, is not the featureless void that the word suggests. It is textured with the trails and burrows of animals, the faint tracks of sea cucumbers that graze the sediment, the small conical mounds thrown up by creatures living beneath the surface. It is inhabited, quietly and comprehensively, by life that has adapted to conditions that would seem to permit none. The team begins the survey along a bearing calculated to intersect the anomaly. For 20 minutes, there is nothing but the same soft terrain sliding past, and this is where the psychological pressure of deep-sea exploration reveals itself. The human mind, watching a screen and knowing that something unusual lies nearby, begins to manufacture significance out of noise. A shadow becomes an edge. A ripple in the sediment becomes the suggestion of a buried structure. Every experienced pilot and scientist in the container knows this tendency intimately, and the culture of the work is built specifically to resist it. Nobody announces a discovery. Nobody speaks in the language of certainty. When the first genuine feature does appear at the edge of the lights, the reaction is not celebration but a lowering of voices and a careful repositioning of the vehicle to get a cleaner angle before anyone commits to what they think they are seeing. What emerges over the following half hour is a line of dark, angular masses rising from the sediment, encrusted heavily with a layer of mineral deposit and biological growth that has softened their original outlines into something almost organic. This is the great difficulty of identifying anything on the deep seabed. Time down here does not preserve objects in the clean, recognizable state that popular imagination expects. Instead, the chemistry of the deep ocean goes to work slowly and relentlessly. Iron structures generate concretions, hard shells of corrosion product, and mineral precipitate that build outward from the metal and can encase an object completely, transforming a manufactured shape into a formless lump. Organisms colonize every available surface, and over decades or centuries they add their own accumulation of growth. What the cameras show, therefore, is not a recognizable thing but a set of forms whose regularity hints at a human origin, while their surface texture conceals every diagnostic detail. The team's task shifts from discovery to the far more demanding work of interpretation. They spend the remaining hours of the dive documenting the site methodically, flying transects at a fixed altitude to build a photographic mosaic, capturing the objects from multiple angles, measuring dimensions against the vehicle's known reference frame. The temptation, always present, is to reach out with the vehicle's manipulator arm and disturb one of the concretions to see what lies beneath. The team resists this, and the reason reflects one of the central tensions of modern deep-sea archaeology, an object that has reached equilibrium with its environment, encased and stabilized, is in a sense protected by the very processes that have hidden it. To disturb it, to break the concretion or lift a fragment from the sediment, is to begin an irreversible interaction. Exposure to disturbance can accelerate the degradation that the surrounding chemistry had slowed to a crawl. The responsible practice, increasingly, is to observe without touching, to gather every piece of information that non-intrusive survey can provide before any decision about a physical intervention is even contemplated. There is also a legal dimension that constrains the crew regardless of their curiosity, because the seabed is not a lawless frontier. Wrecks and cultural material on the ocean floor fall under a tangle of jurisdictions: national claims over continental shelves, international conventions on underwater heritage, and the sovereign immunity that protects state vessels, particularly warships, wherever they came to rest. To touch certain kinds of sites without authorization is not exploration but a violation, and a competent team knows the difference before it ever leaves port. The identification, when it eventually comes together in the weeks after the dive, does not arrive as a single revelation. It accumulates from the mosaic images, the measurements, the arrangement of the objects, and comparison against records of vessels and aircraft lost in this region across the past century and a half. The deep ocean is, among other things, an enormous and largely uncatalogued repository of things that human beings have lost. Every era of maritime activity has contributed to it. Merchant ships driven under by storms, warships sent down in battles whose survivors are now themselves gone. Aircraft that vanished on routine crossings, cargo of every description scattered across the seabed in debris fields that can extend for hundreds of meters as objects tumbled and separated on their long fall through the water. Most of these losses were recorded only as coordinates in a logbook or a final radio position, approximate to within many kilometers, which, in the context of 2 miles of water and a course map, amounts to no fixed location at all. The gap between knowing that something was lost near here and knowing where it now rests is the gap that swallows most of history's missing vessels. They are not hidden by any deliberate concealment. They are hidden by the sheer scale of the search space and the poverty of the information about where to begin. This is worth sitting with because it reframes the entire idea of a silent discovery under 2 miles of water. The romance of the phrase suggests something waiting to be found, as though the ocean were a vault, holding a secret it might one day surrender. The reality is closer to a filing system with no index. The objects are there, in staggering number, but the effort required to locate any single one is so disproportionate to the reward that the vast majority will never be found, not because they are protected by any force, but because the mathematics of searching defeats us. A high-resolution survey of the seabed proceeds at the pace of a slow walk. A vessel dragging or mounting instruments and covering a swath of terrain measured in single-digit kilometers per hour, day after day, at costs that run to tens of thousands of dollars daily. To map even a modest region in the detail required to spot a shipwreck can consume weeks of ship time and a budget that a few institutions can justify without a specific and compelling reason. The result is that discoveries like the one on the monitors that night are almost never the product of searching for that particular object. They are byproducts, anomalies caught during surveys undertaken for entirely different purposes: geological mapping, cable route planning, resource assessment, scientific study of the deep biosphere. The find is real, but it is incidental, and the honesty of that admission is part of what separates serious ocean science from the mythology that surrounds it. There is a further complication that the popular framing tends to omit entirely, which is that finding something and being able to say anything meaningful about it are separated by another vast distance. The concretion that hides an object also hides its story. Establishing what a wreck is when it sank, why it went down, and what it carried requires far more than a photograph of an encrusted mound.
Bring it left just a little more.
It requires archival research to connect the physical remains to a documented loss. It often requires careful and expensive recovery of diagnostic artifacts under archaeological control. And it requires the interpretation of specialists who can read the debris field the way a detective reads a scene, inferring the sequence of events from the position and condition of what remains. Many identified deep-water sites remain only tentatively attributed, their names attached with qualifications, because the evidence is suggestive rather than conclusive. The seabed does not hand over certainty. It offers fragments, and the work of assembling those fragments into knowledge is slow, contested, and frequently inconclusive. And yet the work continues, and it continues because the deep ocean, for all its resistance, is genuinely yielding its secrets faster now than at any previous point in human history. The reason is not a single breakthrough, but the steady convergence of several technologies that have matured together. Autonomous underwater vehicles can now range across the seabed without a tether, mapping in high resolution for hours on end and returning to a ship to offload their data, multiplying the area a single expedition can cover. Sensor resolution has improved to the point where features once lost in the acoustic noise now register clearly. Data processing that once required weeks of manual interpretation can increasingly be assisted by algorithms trained to flag the geometric regularities that distinguish the made from the natural. Each of these advances chips away at the fundamental barrier, the mismatch between the size of the search space and the speed of the search, and the cumulative effect is that the map of the deep is filling in, slowly, region by region, in a process that resembles nothing so much as the gradual illumination of a darkened room as one lamp after another is switched on. The site off the continental slope, whatever it ultimately proves to be, takes its place within this larger project. Its objects will be logged, its coordinates recorded with a precision that the original loss never possessed, its images added to the growing archive of what lies beneath. Perhaps in time it will be revisited, studied more closely, its identity established with the confidence that a single dive cannot provide. Perhaps it will remain, like so many sites, a documented anomaly awaiting resources and reasons that never quite align. Either outcome is a form of progress, because the alternative, the state we occupied for most of our history, was not knowing that it was there at all. There is a particular quality to the moment when the vehicle finally begins its long ascent, leaving the site to the darkness and the slow chemistry that will continue to work on it, whether or not anyone ever returns. The monitors show the seabed receding, the pale forms dissolving back into the black, and then there is nothing again but the scroll of empty water and the number counting down toward the surface. What the crew carries back is not treasure and not a solved mystery.
10 meters.
It is data,
Depth 1500.
carefully gathered and honestly qualified.
Ascent rate
One
steady
more small
at 20
region of the
meters
ocean
per minute.
floor moved from the category of the unknown into the category of the recorded. That is the real character of discovery 2 miles down. It is not the dramatic uncovering of a secret, but the patient extension of the map, the willingness to send machines into the dark and look, and the discipline to report only what was actually seen. The ocean holds far more than we will ever find, and it holds it not out of any intention but out of sheer indifferent scale. Every genuine discovery is a small victory against that scale, and the value of it lies precisely in how hard it was won, and in the honesty of admitting how much still waits, silent and uncounted, in the vast unlit reach below.